Yeah, hey, uh, come on. Hitting new levels of come on the bezel, the not on the iron, the rock heavy metal. What? Yeah. Hitting new levels of come on the bezel, the not on the iron, the rock heavy metal. Whoa, hey, yeah, yeah. Hitting new levels of come on the bezel, the not on the iron, the rock heavy metal. Whoa, hey, yeah, yeah, hey. Hitting new levels will come on the bezel, the nine on the iron, the rock heavy metal, the fire and the power. I grind by the hour, we working on building the whole them in power. The sounds in the stars, mine is on Mars. Nigga like Tesla, lightning bars. Ain't down broke, man, I'ma go hard. Need a big house, big watch, big car. Need a big house, big watch, big car. Need a big bang, man, need to go yard. Living high fashion in the last days. I don't give a damn, man, let him eat cake. I don't give a damn what a hater gon' say. Hard to see an asshole got a fool getting paid. Getting revenue every time, make a wave. Red up like the water, cause we making these waves. Red up like the water with a gang like slaughter. Millie on my mind, live, I be round high. Laughing to the bank while I'm stacking all these dollars. Getting real high while I'm blowing on this la-la. Putting numbers on the board like it was a aha. Praying to the pancake like it was a aha. Got the studio doing numbers like a trap house. In the backwoods, bending corners with the strap house. Hitting new levels will come on the bezel. The nine on the iron, the rock heavy metal, the fire and the power. I grind by the hour, we working on building a whole damn empire. The signs and the stars, mine is on Mars. Nigga like Tesla, lightning bars. Ain't down broke, man, I'ma go hard. Need a big house, big watch, big car.
All right. What's up, everybody? So today's book of the day, or what I've learned from reading this book, is going to be this book right here. Hold on, let me bring it up real quick. It's going to be what I've learned from reading this book, The Epic of Gilgamesh. So this book right here is written by Andrew George. It's actually a new translation, but of course, there's more newer translations than this that some people have, talked about. Also, there's another couple of other sources that are good to read, which I'll be going over them in the future. But right now, I'm talking about Andrew George's book, The Epic of Gilgamesh, a new translation, basically. As you can see, with every book that I own, I always make sure that I have it all tabbed up. Everything that I found interesting is stuff that I found very important, or something that I needed to research better, or get some kind of clarification of some sort. But this book right here is one of my favorites, and it's one of my favorites because it gives a really good introduction, which most of my tabs is the introduction, which is actually pretty interesting. Um, and the only reason why is because it's a complete translation of, well, not a complete translation, but it's a translation of the cuneiform tablets. And it's better if you read it for yourself. And just like with my series, what I've learned from reading these books is mostly about trying to give basically a review of the book, what I've learned, what is, I can find that's backed up by other sources, or stuff that can, expand my knowledge as far as what I already know. But it's never about trying to prove one source over the other, because every book, every cuneiform tablet, every Bible or mythology that you know of is going to be translated and comprehended by different people based off of the knowledge that they have on the basic level. So, just starting off with this book itself, I can tell you, it's. I mean, I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's extraordinary. I think it's something that everybody should take the time to read. I also think I think everybody should, just have this book in their library, especially if they're going to say, talk about Gilgamesh in general by itself. If you haven't read a translation from anybody that you can pick that says that they're experts at that field of translating the text, if you haven't taken the time to read their books yourself, then you miss out on so much. And the reason why is because there's a tab in here that talks about fiction. There's a couple of tabs that talk about fiction in here, actually, but it gives a description of what fiction is. And I think that for the most part, with this book right here, if you take the time to read it for yourself, you would see, what somebody was trying to present to the, basic scholars out there, or people who are interested in this type of stuff. And it's important for me, at the basic level, to just read the book for myself, and then I can see when somebody's trying to make up their own narrative because I can tell when they've read the text for themselves or not. And I give you some great examples in here. So we're just gonna jump to the first tab that I have on here. It said, and most people know already that Gilgamesh was trying to live forever, basically. And it says right here, the first page of the introduction, it says, the fear of death may be one of the epic's principal themes, but the poem deals with so much more as a story of one man's path to wisdom, of how he was formed by his successes and failures. It offers many profound insights into human condition, into life and death, and the truths that touch us all. The subject that most held the attention of the royal courts of Babylonia and Assyria was perhaps another topic that underlines much of the poem, the debate on the proper duties of kingship, what a good king should do and should not do. Now, I'll get into how uh, crazy Gilgamesh was, of course. There's a lot of, man, Gilgamesh was a tyrant in a lot of people's eyes, and I'll get into why he was a tyrant. I've talked about it and touched on that previously in other shows, but because I'm actually going over this book, you will see for yourself, basically how much of a tyrant this man was. He was a man, and he was also had, a God's blood in him, and I'll go into that about how that came to be also. Here's the next tab. And this is what it says. Okay, so this is not my words. I'm reading it actually from the book of what I've learned. Okay, and it says the spell of Gilgamesh has captured many since Reiki. I'm not sure exactly how to say that, but it's Rilke. So that over the years the story has been variously reworked into plays, novels, and at least 2 operas. Translations have now appeared in at least 16 languages, and more appear year by year, so that the last decade has added 10 to the dozens already published. Among the 10 are 2 in English. So that's important too, because anybody that speaks multiple languages knows that one word could mean one thing in one language, and then in a whole, or another, uh, culture, or however you want to call it, and it means something totally different, on the other side. So that's something to keep in, in the back of your head. So the next tab is the manuscripts of Gilgamesh are cuneiform tablets, smooth cushion-shaped rectangles of clay inscribed on both sides with wedge-shaped cuneiform writings. And they come from the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Anatolia. Especially in the land that is now Iraq, there are few ancient sites that have not yielded clay tablets. Cuneiform writing was invented in the city-states of Lower Mesopotamia in about 3000 BC, when the administration of the great urban institutions, the palace and the temple, became too complex for the human memory to cope with. Now, basically, what that means to me and what I've learned is that in the past, these traditional oral stories were passed to each other word by mouth, orally, right? And they had to remember them, word for word. That's basically what some people were presenting their, in their text and stuff. And I'll give you a good example. Perfect example of this is the Book of Eli. You remember when Denzel was going through the whole area with the Bible? They was looking for the last Bible. He was supposed to take it to a boat, which basically an ark or some sort. And he was supposed to make copies of it. But, the one guy, I can't remember his name, actually took the Bible from him, but because Denzel Washington had read that Bible so many times, not reading it with his eyes because he was blind, but with Braille, right? He memorized it. So when he got to the ark, he was able to tell them verbatim, word for word, what the Bible said, and they were able to make copies of that after that. That's a very good example of how things were back then, is that you had to remember these stories word for word. So when people say, in these schools, they used to call them in Mesopotamia Eduba, Edubba, was where they would send their people to learn about these texts, their children, and so on and so forth. It's basically just a school, university, or whatever you want to call them. And they would have to get the cuneiform writing system down perfect. Like they couldn't miss words, they couldn't miss anything like that. They had to have it word for word. But because, during civilization, because it grew and things had to be, it was harder to remember things. Stories, were told and retold, things were added to the stories, and so on and so forth. They had to have records of them. And that was very important to them, because if the person who memorized it all, or the people or persons who memorized them all, were no longer around, then the information would eventually get lost, right? And then in reality, that's very important to a lot of people, is to remember this stuff by, you know, straight up facts. You just can't take away the fact that at that time people remembered. Another good example of that is in today's world, everybody has a cell phone of some sort. You probably got a lot of phone numbers in there. How many people memorize half those phone numbers in there? I mean, back in my day, I'm 42 years old. I remembered every single one of my friends' phone numbers. Yeah, I would sometimes put them in a little pad or a book or something like that to try to remember, just in case I forgot them, or because their number changed and I was still learning it. But for the most part, I could at least call at least 10 people easily by remembering their phone numbers. Today, people have to look at their phones just to make sure that they have the number correctly. So that's another good example. All right, the next tab. The two languages, Sumerian and Akkadian, had long been used side by side by the people of Lower Mesopotamia, though Sumerian predominated in the urban south and Akkadian in the more provincial north. This geographical division was enshrined in the terminology of later tradition, according to which the homeland of the black-headed ones, as these people call themselves, comprised two regions: Sumer, the southern part of Lower Mesopotamia, and Akkad, the northern part. Now, this is what I was talking about. Sumer, the Sumerians and the Akkadians, it was basically a different culture. So that's why you can see that they had different stories. Matter of fact, a good example of that is the Sumerians called their gods the Anuna, right? But the Akkadians called them the Anunnaki. That's where we get the term Anunnaki from. We don't get that from the Sumerians. I don't know why people believe that. I mean, that's one of the basic foundations of knowing who the Anuna / the Anunnaki are, is that the Sumerians didn't call them the Anuna or the Anunnaki. They called them the Anuna. The Akkadians are the ones that call them the Anunnaki. Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, that's just playing with words. And yeah, that is absolutely right. But you have to know and understand the basic level of that. And the reason why is, I'll get to it at the end on why you need to know that that's the difference in it, because it plays a major part on who the Anuna / Anunnaki are and who the Igigi are, or Igigi. I've heard it said different ways, of course. The next tab is, according to tradition, Sargon rose to power by winning the favor of the goddess Ishtar. For nearly 100 years, his dynasty exercised dominion over the city-states of Lower Mesopotamia and much of northern Mesopotamia too. Now, this is important because Sargon of Akkad is who brought, the north and the south together. Okay, he is the reason why it all started to fall under the Akkadians at one time, and then of course it came to somebody else after that, and so on and so forth. But before him, the Sumerians and the Akkadians were completely separate. Well, I'm not going to say completely separated, because they definitely traded with each other. And I like how it said right here on the last tab, it said, was it the last tab? I think it said, it definitely said about 3000 BC. No, it was the tab before that where it said 3000 BC was when the city-states came to be, and so on and so forth. That's important because I always say, what is the criteria needed to be considered a civilization? That's important to me because Dr. Nili Samet from Bar-Ilan University, and I've said this plenty of times in the past, where I took a class from her, and she says the civilization of the Sumerians started around 3200 BC. So 3000, you know how I always say 3000 BC to 3100 BC, 3200 BC. It's all because people pick the number that they want to create a new narrative with. I give you a perfect example of that. A lot of people say the Sumerians are considered the first civilization, but you can find hieroglyphics in Egypt that go way before the Sumerians, right? And I've taken a class from an Egyptian university where they said that the Egyptian civilization started around 5500 BC. I wrote an article on that on my website, rebirthoftheword.com. And I've also, I even have the class. If you go to my website under the Knowledge is Power tab, I have the class name of where I took it from. And matter of fact, actually, I just recently went back to that class to go get some notes from there. And they actually have that class on YouTube now. It's no longer available online, but they have a YouTube video of it. So everything, and I didn't watch the YouTube video. I just slowly skimmed through it, but it was basically all the videos that I seen in that class is right along in that on that YouTube video. So that's interesting to me. The what's interesting to me a lot about the text and what the Sumerians and the Akkadians believed is that yes, they had a lot of similarities when it came to their gods, but they also had a lot of differences. I've actually read more differences than they did similarities, and what I mean by reading differences is just the way they described how things happened. It wasn't always based on the same similarity as I give a good example, Enki and Enlil being one in the being brother and being brothers. There is actually some texts that go to the Akkadians, even the Babylonians for that matter, that say that Enki and Enlil, or one of them could have been the father and the other one could have been the son. If you go to the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature, which I talk about a lot, you can read either or just in the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature by itself, which that's supposed to be the bread and butter of the Sumerians. But I've already talked about that in the past, so I don't have to rehash that information. But the time frame of what the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature falls under is the dates is closer to the Akkadian time frame than the Sumerians. And I've talked about this also before, is that just because the Sumerians, it was written in a Sumerian language, doesn't mean that it was actually the Sumerians. It could have been a group of anybody, the Akkadians, the Hittites, the Babylonians, Chaldeans, and so on and so forth, just dependent on when you look at the time frame. Because remember in my last episodes, I talked about how the cuneiforms are deteriorated. Some of them are so broken up that they had to fill in the blank from other cultures and civilizations and so on and so forth. So that's important. So the next tab is much more was written in the Babylonian dialect of Akkadian. I'm going to say this again because it's important. This is what I mean about understanding the language that it was written in, but it may have never fell under that actual civilization or group of individuals. There's just how language, basically progressed as time went on. So much more was written in the Babylonian dialect of Akkadian, but Sumerian retained a particular prestige. Its primacy as the language of learning was enshrined in the curriculum that had to be mastered by the student scribe. In order to learn how to use the cuneiform script, even to write Akkadian, the student had to learn Sumerian. For as the proverb said, a scribe who knows no Sumerian, what sort of scribe is he? None at all, for in this period the language of tuition was, at least in part, Sumerian, falling foul of every regulation, one young student laminated. So that's what I was saying is that, because the tablets are so broken up, and when they found in the cuneiform time, the Sumerian time frame, they had to use the Akkadian. They used the next best thing. Okay, so the Akkadian might have filled those blanks in, and they were able to finish out that story or complete that story, but that doesn't mean that's actually what happened. They're just using the Akkadians. And of course, like I said this plenty of times, reading something and comprehending it is two different things. You can read something all day, but comprehending is a skill that is gained through many hours of trying to I can't even explain how to comprehend things. It just takes a lot of knowledge from a lot of different sources to comprehend something. The next tab is on the same page of that introduction. It says, to prove he could write, the would-be scribe copied out on dictation and from memory text in Sumerian. So you remember when I said they had to memorize this stuff. They literally had to memorize everything. And then they had to put it in a cuneiform tablet. So take a good example of that is, imagine you going to school, right? You're learning a poem, let's say Edgar Allan Poe's Raven poem, right? You would have to memorize that whole entire poem. And then, you know, how you take the test at the end, you would have to write that poem out exactly word for word from what you read when from that poem of Edgar Allan Poe. And that's how at the basic level that you had to, you know, learn the things. You just couldn't, and you couldn't mess up any words. If you messed up something, you would get your hand slapped with a ruler, or you would get beat, or you wouldn't be able. There's so many different things that I've read that would happen to somebody that was on that path of trying to gain knowledge and copy it and share it on to the, you know, the rest of the world. The next tab. Alongside the great mass of Sumerian literary tablets from the schools of 18th century Babylonia, we have also recovered little contemporaneous literature in Akkadian. This we call Old Babylonian literature. Okay. A few old Babylonian literary tablets derived from the same schools as the literary tablets in Sumerian and also appear to be the work of apprentice scribes. These include a few scraps of Akkadian, Gilgamesh, which are among the texts translated in chapter 2. But though it seems that some literature in Akkadians was studied in the schools of this period, literary tablets in this language are so rare among the huge quantities of Sumerian tablets that it is clear they were not part of the prescribed curriculum. So that just you know, basically solidifies exactly what I was just talking about, is that it could be the literature of Akkadian, but they could call it also the Old Babylonian. So I have an 1873 Bible, original, straight from 1873. If I was going to get a Bible in that time frame, 1873, and they had a Dollar General or Walmart or some sort, I would go to a Dollar General and Walmart, and that 1873 Bible would be sitting on the shelves, and I would take it and buy it, right? But this is the thing, in that 1873 Bible, which is interesting to me, is that it says the Chaldeans, the Sumerians, and the Babylonians are one and the same. And of course, I'll be going over that. I already did a little snippet of that on my YouTube channel when I was, you know, when I first got that Bible. I was going scheming through things and stuff like that, and that's what I found. So that's, to me, that's just important, you know. Let's see the next tab. It says other tablets, and this is actually on the same page also. It says other tablets of Akkadian literary works have been recovered from this period, which are of a certain provenance than the school tablets. Some of them are finely written and were evidently kept perhaps by individual scholars as permanent library copies. Among these are three old Babylonian tablets of Gilgamesh, which contribute significantly to our knowledge of the story. The Pennsylvania and Yale tablets, and the fragment reportedly from Sippar. Now, I've already talked about all the sources that I use, and that's, you know, Pennsylvania, Yale, you know, all these different sources that I've talked about in the past: ETCSL, CDLI, ORAC, ORAAC, or ORACC, I believe that's how you spell it. So there's, you know, I go to the actual sources to bring, you know, what is actually said. I don't want to bring, you know, I rarely share my thoughts and theories and ideas of what I've read. I just share what exactly is, you know, in the books that I've read, because it's for the simple fact that, like I said, there are other sources out there that you can read. Matter of fact, I'll bring this up. There's a lot of times when I would say Andrew George said something in his book, but George Smith actually said something. Okay. I've been known to say that, and I even correct myself on the spot and let everybody know it could have either been Andrew George or George Smith. If I don't have the book in front of me, it's hard to, you know, do it. And that's why a lot of times when I have a subject, I always keep my sources nearby, because if I'm talking to like in the X space driving down the road or something like that, or if I'm on those what is it that I can't even remember the other one that is called, that I would join, where it's, people just talking. Um, I will mix them two up, and it's a fair mistake, because Andrew George Smith, right? The word is what confuses me a lot sometimes. So that's why I like to do this series that I have, what I've learned from reading this book or these books, because for the simple fact that it's easier for me just to pick up the book and say, this is what it says. Even when I'm at home and I'm talking on X spaces or Twitter spaces, whatever people want to call them, if somebody's talking about Gilgamesh, I'll go run to my library real quick and grab out a few of the sources that I have on Gilgamesh, from Andrew George Smith, Stephanie Dalley, and so on and so forth. I haven't read Stephanie's book yet. I was just intrigued to go read it in the next few days, because I actually have her books, and it's just on the back channel of reading things. I'm trying to do stuff. Like I said, it takes a lot of time for me to go through these books, because I like to read every book that I own 3 times. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to just start. I've read at least my first 600 books at least 3 times each. Every book that I own, I've read at least 3 times. Well, not that I've owned, but every book that I read at least 3 times. And I wanted to make it a point to read every book that I own that many times, but that's starting to become overwhelming, especially that I have books piling up and piling up. And it's only because I'm just trying to verify what I say and what I've read. But I think these tabs help me out a lot more, because I know what to look for now. I think the reason why I was doing that in the past was because, and I did this for years too. I can't even tell you how many years I've been doing this, but I think the reason why I was doing it was because of the simple fact that I wanted to make sure I understood what I was reading. And I can tell you right now, if you read enough books, a lot of people will cite the same exact source. So, and I've started to realize that probably like 2 years ago. I was like, man, these people are saying the same thing this person's saying, and the person's saying, and it's getting to that point where I can just go ahead and just, whatever I find interesting that I haven't read before, I can just tab up and go over it later. The next tab and this is the next page on the last tab that I just read. It says the old Babylonian Gilgamesh tablets revealed that there was already at this time an integrated Gilgamesh epic, which, as the Pennsylvania tablet reports, bore the title Shutor Elai Shari, surpassing all other kings. Works of ancient Mesopotamian literature were really created out of nothing, and the origins of the epic probably also go back to an oral tradition. See, so I look at words that's important, like probably, because now you're saying, okay, could have been, could have not been. We're not sure. So that's something that I would tab up and see if I would, I would go back and say, okay, hey, how can I see if this information's been updated since then? So that's the reason why I tabbed that up. Basically, was because of the simple fact that the word probably was used, which I find very interesting, right? And that's one of the reasons why I like new translations and revised books and so on and so forth, because I look for that information that they asked before. So the next tab, it says the standard version of the Babylonian epic is known from a total of 73 manuscripts extant. The 35 that have survived from the libraries of King Ashbanabal at Nineveh, 8 more tablets and fragments from the 3 other Assyrian cities, Ashur, Kala, and Hazarina, and 30 from Babylonia, especially the cities of Babylon and Uruk. So that's important to me, because it says Ashbanabal tablets are the oldest. The latest manuscript discovered so far was written in about 130 BC by one Bel-Usar. Oh Lord, protect the brothers. That's what it says. Oh, and let me see. One of the things that I found interesting. Let me go back to that one of the other tabs. I want to see. It says what it said. The black-headed ones, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it said the black-headed ones. It says this geographical division was enshrined in the terminology of later tradition, according to which the homeland of the black-headed ones. Some people call them the black-headed people. Samuel Noah Kramer in his books Save the Black-Headed People. So when hearing that, it just makes me understand that there's more than one way they described them, but black-headed was one good one. I also learned that black-headed peoples or black-headed ones also could have meant mankind, humanity, and brothers. That's why, and I learned that because maybe that's one of the reasons why a lot of people consider Inky and Lil brothers. Anybody that been around a lot of, black people, especially in the hip hop community, they call each other brothers, and now it's bro. Everybody's using the word bro. It went from brothers to bro. So that's it. That's actually interesting to me, and that makes me think, okay, were they really brothers, or were they just saying, "Yo, my brother, what up?" You know what I'm saying? So it's just interesting to me. Uh, the next tab is while there is a temptation for a modern editor to ignore the gaps, believe that no adult reader is well served by such a procedure. The gaps are themselves important in number and size, for they remind us how much is still to be learned of the text. And that's what I was saying. So here's a good example. And I showed it plenty of times on the other uh, things, live shows. But you can see how the tablets are, and this is of course a drawing of the tablets, but you can see how deteriorated they are, how broken they are, how there's missing things and stuff like that. So that's important to me because, like I said, they might have used a different uh, group of individuals, culture, civilization to fill in the blanks, right? It could have been the Sumerians could have said one thing in one tablet and it was so broken and deteriorated uh, that they found, a Babylonian version, and they compared it to the Sumerian. They could say, okay, yeah, this is about the same individual, and I'll go over, the different names of Gilgamesh too. His name wasn't always Gilgamesh, so um, but I'll go over that in a minute. The next tablet or the next tab that I found interesting is the epic in its context, myth, religion, and wisdom. That's what it says. The epic in its context, myth, religion, and wisdom. Now, I've already went over what myth is. A lot of people understand it to be fiction. If you go to the Strong's Concordance, you'll read that it could be a fake story or a made up story of some sort. But you can also read that it is known as just a traditional oral story, and it's not always a story that is made up, right? I think the reason why at that time in the Greek time when they had their myths, muthos, I believe that's how it's said, because it wasn't able to be seen as factual all the time. Some people considered it to be fake, but if you read, the many definitions for myth for itself or mythology for itself is based on a traditional oral story, or it could also mean something that's just made up. But this is why this is important to me, because I always say that you have to understand the context. A lot of people say, oh, the Gilgamesh, this happened to Gilgamesh, and this is facts. This is what happened. There's no lying, blah, 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 blah. Because in this introduction, which I've said so many times, and I'll read it out, it says, though the story of Gilgamesh is certainly fiction, Moran's diagnosis is also a warning not to read the epic as myth. There is little consensus as to what myth is and what it is not. In ancient Mesopotamian mythological texts show considerable variety. Some of them, particularly the older ones, contain just one myth. Others put together two or more myths. Two features are particularly characteristic of these mythological compositions. On the one hand, the story centers on the deed of a god or gods. And on the other hand, its purpose is to explain the origin of some feature of the natural or social world. So to me, that's just very important, but how do you decide what's fact over fiction, right? How do you decide what is right, what is wrong? How do you decide somebody made something up? You really can't, because when we don't get to go back in that time frame. You just use your basic information and the knowledge that you have on hand to, really just bring that to a way of understanding, comprehending. Okay, the basic thing that everybody should know is that The best way to understand this, and I'll just keep it simple, stupid, because that's the military term that I always grew up on, or was it that I learned about, is just take it with a grain of salt. This could happen. This could have not happened. How could this be explained in today's world? How can this be explained in the past? How could this be relevant to today's standards, right? And what I mean by today's standards is understanding what myth is, right? Are we using the myth from, the idea of philosophy from the Greeks, or are we using myth as what we see as today, or are we using myth as being just a traditional oral story? I mean, that's a battle that everybody can fight, and it's worth fighting because some people want to know the truth and some people don't. And you just got to have enough energy to put into it to understand it. The next tab is, for it was Gilgamesh who in Babylonian tradition rebuilt his city's wall on its primordial foundations. And it was the fame won him by this enduring monument that would be his comfort. Um, you know, it's so interesting that there is. Yeah, let me go to this next tab on the same page. It says Gilgamesh begins as an immature youth capable of anything and accepting no check. Eventually, he comes to accept the power and reality of death, and thus he reaches reflective maturity. That's just like a good example could be how to explain that is uh, how the older you get, the more you realize that life is not forever. I'm 42 years old. I wasn't thinking about my life and how it would end up when I was in my 20s. I was just having fun doing whatever I wanted. I would go to the club, I would drink, what I'm saying? I would go party and doing all kinds of stuff. But I also was serious about my education in some ways. So, at the bare minimum, I always stayed on top of, trying to understand these mythologies, but I didn't take it as serious as I take it now. Um, and that's one of the things that's growing up would teach you. Some people will do this at a young age. There are some people at 20 years old that takes this very serious, but then you also have to sacrifice some things too. I have a family. I have a mother-in-law living with me. And now I'm always doing things with my kids and my wife and stuff like that, and I don't sacrifice my time with them to do this stuff, because why would I want to do that, right? I don't want to take away from them. But people who are single, and my first 10 years in the military, I was deployed, back to back. When I came back from deployment, I would, go party. Why? Because I knew every time I was going to deploy, I knew once I came back from one deployment, I was going to be right back out there again within a year and a half. And I knew that any moment any one of those deployments could have been my last moment on earth. So I wanted to live my life to the fullest. Yes, I feel like gaining knowledge is the fullest to me right now, but that's because I have time now. I'm retired. I have the time to feel that way. But a lot of people don't have that time. A lot of people have to work, so you have to balance out your passion with your family, and you got to make sure that you don't take away from something to do something else, and it's very difficult for a lot of people, uh, balancing our time. There's a lot of people who work 9 to 5 jobs, and sometimes you don't want to come home and read a book. If you do, you might fall asleep reading it, and you can't dig as deep as you want to, and that's no fault of your own. You got to do what you got to do to survive. But that's why I also say, imagine the right people getting the sponsorship for what they do. Saying a lot of people are right now just creating content just to create content. They ask stupid questions that can easily be explained if you knew where to look for the information. And when they are given the information, they don't even acknowledge it because it goes against their content creation. They make money off of this stuff. I've been to enough conferences and conventions to realize that they are all the same. And the people say the same shit over and over again. Even when they are corrected online, they don't go back and change their information. I was watching a video on Randall Carson. He still thinks that Homo sapiens go back 200,000 years ago, but there's been information weight that has been updated at from that goes 300,000 years ago. But he literally went to the cosmic summit and still said 200,000 years, and it just blows my mind because you're going off of old information. So that's just telling me you're not researching. You're just waiting for you see something, you like the narrative, it made you feel good inside, and boom, now you're still going around saying it. Now imagine if he went to the cosmic summit just this last June and said, hey, look guys, I used to say 200,000 years, they actually go back 300,000 years, and guess where they came from? Morocco, Africa. But he won't say that. People don't say this stuff, and it's crazy that it blows my mind. And that's why I say at this point, I've experienced so many conventions, and I've been on so many other people's podcasts. Is I even bring the sources when I talk about this stuff, and we'll get done discussing it, and then the next day they'll host somebody else on their show, and that person would say the same ass backwards thing, and the people will be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. They don't go and say, well, hey, I just learned that's new there's new information on that. A good example of that is I had some individuals talk about a pictographic script, asked me for a source, I gave them the source, and they still published a video that goes against the facts. You know what I'm saying? They even acknowledge that, hey, yeah, you're right. You showed a peer-reviewed article on it. That's, who can deny that? But their narrative or their friendship with some people, they have to go ahead and just publish that video. And that's the type of people that bring our history, our knowledge back. You take 2 steps forward, you go back 4 times, 4 steps backwards when you listen to somebody repeat something that you know for a fact is not correct. It might be fun to you and it might be a business to you, but that's the stupidest thing. If you are doing this for a business, then it's all about the money to you, and it's not about the knowledge. Because if it was about the knowledge, that business wouldn't last. Because guess what? There are people out there that I know personally that can tear people's asses up when it comes to this historical stuff. Not even just me bringing sources to the table. I'm not even going to talk about myself. I know matter of fact, I know a dude named Kalani. This dude is on it like white on rice. And I can tell you, if he had the sponsorship that he had, that he deserves, there wouldn't be some of this shit out here that some people would say, and he never was the type of person to just say, hey, this is what it is, without bringing the sources to the table. So I feel like, at this point, these conventions and conferences and all these people hosting the same people and over again, they're only hosting it because it creates content for them. And people literally are in the comments all the time saying, this is my favorite podcast. Yeah, it's your favorite because it goes with your narrative. Now let somebody come in there and prove you wrong easily by bringing sources to the table and see what happens then. Then it turns into an argument because people get in their feelings and they don't like it and so on and so forth. And that's why, I like my series, and I don't know anybody else that's doing this. What I've learned from reading this book, I'm telling you exactly what the sources say, and the sources that people use in particular at that. Like I said, I know for a fact, if you read anything about Gilgamesh in any book, you're going to hear George. You're going to hear about George Smith. You're going to hear about Andrew George. You'll probably hear about Thurkill Jacobson, Stephanie Dolly. You're going to hear about so many different people. And guess what? I have all those in my library, and I know others that have those same books in their library. You pick those books up and show them, hey, this is what the text say. Like when I read the part about fiction in this book, it takes away the narrative, what somebody's trying to create. And because the narrative is not good content, because people don't like to feel bad or feel stupid, they won't take it in consideration. They want to feel like they're the smartest person in the room. I'm that type of person where I'm trying to find the smartest room. I'm not trying to be the smartest one in the room. I'm trying to find the room that has people that are smarter than me. And then when I feel like I'm smart enough to understand what those people are saying, and I become the smartest one because I take that information plus my information that I already have. Once I feel like that I'm having enough conversations where people are saying just the same thing over and over again, I leave that room to go find another smart room. And then I just keep doing that over and over and over again. So it's just very important to go back and read the sources for yourself. The next tab, we know from many ancient Mesopotamian sources in Sumerian and Akkadian that the Babylonians believed the purpose of the human race to be the service of the gods. Before mankind's creation, the myth tells us the cities of Lower Mesopotamia were inhabited by the gods alone, and they had to feed and clothe themselves by their own efforts. Under the supervision of Enlil, the lord of the earth, the lesser deities grew and harvested the gods' food, tilled the soil, and exhaustingly dug the rivers and waterways that irrigated the fields. Now, this is interesting to me because I always say that from the text that I've read from Oxford University and other texts, that Nuna that slash Anunnaki didn't come from a planet called Nibiru. They came from the depths of the sea. However you want to look at that. Enki was known as a water god. He was also known as a fish god because in some of the older texts, Oannes, when he, some people consider one of them one and the same in some sense. The idea is being a fish god. This is no different than Jesus also being, remember the what would Jesus do? I can't remember the word or the acronym that was for that at this time. It's weird. I just can never remember off the top of my head for some reason, which I will go over in the future. But Enlil was the Lord of the earth, right? And like I said, there is no text or cuneiform tablet out there that says the Anunnaki came from a planet Nibiru that orbit our sun every 3,600 years, and they came here to mine our gold so they can send back the planet Nibiru. There's nothing that says that in any of the texts. And I've went over that when I went over Zachariah Sitchin's book. I just finished his series up, so I went over that in great detail, pulled up sources online and so forth and so on. So the next tab is the long life of this ideology from at least the 3rd millennium BC until the coming of Islam. Listen, the coming of Islam. Long after the demise of Babylonian civilization is confirmed by Surah 51 of the Quran, which makes a particular point of rejecting the old belief. I have not created jinn and men for any other end than that they should serve me. I require not sustenance from them, neither will I that they feed me. So, Islam is another source that, helps back up what the Gilgamesh story has and so forth. It's just interesting because the next tab is right underneath it, actually. And then, there are 4 individuals. Well, there's multiple individuals who are in charge of helping create the human race, according to the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature. Because yes, that's actually in the text. But it wasn't just Ea or Enki who did it. It was Enki, Enlil, Ninhursag, and Anu. Now I use the Babylonian, Akkadian, and Sumerian names to say that because it's much easier. I don't like to say An. Which is a word for him. But it says right here, there was a flaw built into EA's creation of man, a flaw that explains how it was that something made by the gods for their own purposes was nevertheless a very imperfect tool. The clay, now this is important right here. This is very, very important, I say, because if you look at, it says, hold on, because it cuts off the word. It says, the clay that Ea gave to the mother goddess as the raw material from which she bore mankind was animated, given spirit by mixing it with the blood of a god. And this is what it says. This is actually from the cuneiform tablet. It says, let one god be slaughtered. So one god had to be slaughtered, and the gods be thereby cleansed. With his flesh and his blood, let the lady of the gods mix some clay so that God and man are mixed together in the clay. In future time, let us hear the drumming of the heartbeat from the flesh of a god. Let the spirit be produced. So that's interesting to me, right? Because one god had to be slaughtered, and another god had to, basically be sacrificed. Mixed with blood. That god had to be mixed with blood. And it's just interesting to me because of the simple fact that if you look at the reality of it, if you look at the Egyptian god Khnum, he literally created man in the text from a pottery's wheel, using a pottery wheel and clay. This is actually him. There are depictions of him having like sitting or standing by some type of pottery, which is a pottery wheel and a little pot or whatnot, or not a pot, but the human as being part of the pot So instead of seeing the clay that people do, when the pottery wheel is spinning and they're sculpting it with their hands and stuff like that, it was a human. So Khnum uh, is also a clay pottery type building or creator god, and that's just interesting to me because that goes to the ancient Egyptians. And some people have read that some people consider Khnum and Enki being one and the same because of that idea. That's a stretch, of course, because I mean, how many guys really are into that? But I mean, that's a good way to take that as a thought and analyze it and put it in your brain for memory, basically. The next tab is the myth of a man's early barbarism is at odds with the tradition in which the human race is created to take up the tools of the city dwelling gods, but the mythology of many civilizations is oral and diverse in origin, so that different traditions of how things came to be tend to coexist without difficulty. As is well known, the first two chapters of Genesis preserve two quite different accounts of God's creation of man. The civilization of man, according to the Babylonian mythology, was the work of the gods who sent kingship from heaven, and especially of the god Ea, who dispatched the seven sages to Eridu and other early cities, and with them all the arts and crafts of city life. These were the beings who, according to the epic's prologue, founded Uruk with its wall. Did the seven sages not lay its foundations? Foremost among these sages was the fishman Oannes Adapa, who rose from the sea. Government, society, and work were thus imposed on man. See, so coming from the sea. Okay, so I always say, and honestly, if you just take the time and just read the text for yourself, you will see how you could be accurate or how you could be misinformed. And it really is just all about, understanding the text. This literally says Oannes comes from where it says rose from the sea, rose from the sea, rose, not descended from the sea, because a lot of people have said to me, well, the universe is considered the sea of the universe, it's considered the seas outside of space, right? I understand that, but you have to look at all the words. Rose, coming up, right? So when you rise from the seas, you're coming from within the depths of the seas, which I've explained earlier in past episodes. You don't descend down. You don't come down. Okay? You're not coming down. So that's why I say you got to understand the context, and that's why it's important for me. The next tab. In the meantime, the flood had abated, and the ark had grounded on a high mountain. Then, and this is interesting because this is where people say that the Bible gets its flood story from Gilgamesh or the Mesopotamian mythologies in itself, because they actually have older text that talks about, and I read it again. In the meantime, the flood had abated, and the ark had grounded on a high mountain peak. Then, as incense rose from where Atram Hasa, and it says Atram Hasas, Atramas. A lot of times it's just Atra Hasis. I could be saying that wrong, but there's no M on there. The spelling is different depending on the time frame, right? Or linguistically or transliteration, how you want to pick it, right? But it offered thanks for his survival. The sweet smell of food wafted up to heaven, and the gods all rushed down to feed. Enlil remonstrated with the gods for the failure of his plan, and fingers were pointing at Enki, Ea. That's what it says, Ea. This is what is interesting to me. It says in the Bible, it says God, G-O-D, capital G-O-D, or it says Elohim if you want to go to the further text, right? But we also know that Elohim can mean one God or many gods. It depends on the context that's used. But it's here in the Gilgamesh, it says God, lowercase G-O-D-S. Okay, so, and the gods all rushed down to feed. So it wasn't just one God, right? It was all gods, right? So that's interesting to me. On the next tab, it says, okay, so this is talking about, and this would actually made me buy the books. And it's an older book, of course, I just haven't read it yet. Is there is also Stephanie Dolly, Miss in Mesopotamia. Shout out to Alexander, who was talking about, and also to Kalani Star, who was talking about that earlier when we was on Facebook. Um, both agree, but I agree with both of them. Um, that it's worth reading, but like I said, I haven't read it, but I agree with both of them. Okay, yeah, I'm back up there. Let me make sure. Yeah, it froze up for a second. Let me see if it comes back up. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so they out there messing with the internet. So yeah, I'm back up there, so it's good to go. um, but I agree that everybody should get Stephanie Dolly's book, and the reason why I got her book is because she has her own translations and so on and so forth. But like I said, I haven't read it. But they both said they agree with each other that it's a much better translation or you know information, so on and so forth. Um, there, there's also Thorgild Jacobson, The Treasures of Darkness. I have that. I've read that. I believe I either have a hard copy of it or I have it uh, on my Kindle. I can't remember. Yeah, Lil Vi said it was glitching on the side. Yeah, some they out there working on that internet, bro. I don't know what happened. They, maybe I should have waited a few days, but good thing we're up, so that's all that matters. So the next tab is just a time chart. Uh, let's see. Um, it has a time chart right here. Okay, and like I said, you know, to get a better understanding on it, I highly recommend everybody getting a book. But what it says is basically, I'll just go over a couple of things. It says 3000 BC is the early city states of Sumer. Okay, and it says right next to it, intellectual life, invention of writing, earliest Sumerian tablets. And it says 3000 BC. Now that's interesting to me, like I said, because of the simple fact that when you read or Dr. Nili Summit, what I've read from her and taken her classes, she gives a date of 3200 BC. If a lot of scholars, even ChatGPT, Grok, and so on and so forth, if you type in the civilization of Egyptian civilization, it's going to say 3100 BC. Maybe not as right now. I know I typed it in before, but it gives around about a 31. Matter of fact, just to keep it simple, the Egyptian, according to scholars who argue the Sumerian civilization being as the first civilization, it it would say always 100 years after um, the Sumerian civilization. So if the Sumerian civilization started at 3200 BC, they'll say 3100 BC. If the Sumerian civilization started at 3000 BC, they're going to say the Egyptian 2900 BC. And I know this for a fact because I've seen it so many different times. It's always about 100 years, and I don't know why that's standard across a lot of the different sources, but that's definitely what I've read plenty of times. Um, the next tab is basically the standard version of the Babylonian Gilgamesh epic, and it's titled "He Who Saw the Deep." And it says Gilgamesh, and this is where it talks about how he was a tyrant and stuff like that. It says King Gilgamesh tyrannizes the people of Uruk, who complain to the gods to divert his superhuman energies. The gods create his counterpart, the wild man Enkidu, who has brought up the animals, who is brought up by the animals of the wild. Enkidu is spotted by a trapper who lures him away from the herd with a prostitute. The prostitute shows him her arts and proposes to take him to Uruk, where Gilgamesh has been seeing him in his dreams. Okay. This is interesting to me because it says that um, uh, Gilgamesh, you know, uh, the people complain to the gods, but Gilgamesh is supposed to have god blood in him, God, some kind of he's I can't remember, is it like 2/3 God? I have to wait till I get to the part where it talks about it. Um, but he, Enkidu was brought up by wild animals. Now, there's a lot of talk out there in the paranormal world about Bigfoot, and it's interesting to me because if you look at the depictions of Gilgamesh or Enkidu, sometimes he's with horns, and sometimes he's like with some kind of bull like type legs, half bull, half human type legs, and he has hair long as tresses, or he has hair all over his body. It's just different depictions and so on and so forth. Um, and I actually wrote an article on it too, and it's actually in my book too, Journey Through the Origins of History, where I talk about it also. That uh, Enkidu could possibly be some type of Bigfoot. We're not sure. I mean, if in reality, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people. I even went to a Bigfoot convention in North Carolina, and a lot of people talk about orbs and talk about some type of UFO sighting, or even sometimes portals. Which I know it's a lot of people going to roll their eyes at this, and that's fair. I mean, you have every right to it. But this is what people have said they've seen with their own eyes. I can't tell anybody else what they've experienced. I'm going to say this again. I can't tell anyone what they've experienced. Okay. Because I'm not in that person's body to tell them, because I have my own weird experiences, from astral projection to even having an out of body experience from when I was wounded in combat. So who could tell? So who in their right mind is going to tell me my experience that happened to me in Afghanistan when I got blown up, or who's going to tell me about, my own you know doings and feelings on what I've experienced in astral projection, right? Um, but it definitely says that uh, in many ways, or I would say that in many ways, that it gives a description of a Bigfoot. I mean, we don't know who Enkidu really is. I mean, we know the stories from the Epic of Gilgamesh and other sources and stuff, but the idea that he was lured by a trapper, and that trapper was using a prostitute, meant that that individual was close to human like than possible, right? And this individual Enkidu was accepted by the animals around there. It doesn't say exactly what type of animals, it just says animals. So I'm guessing like deer, bears, coyotes, wolves, or anything, something like that, right? Just animals, birds, different things. So, um, and you know, it's also interesting that it says that Gilgamesh has been seeing him in dreams. I've talked about visions a lot, the Ezekiel well, Jacob's ladder, and so on and so forth. When it comes to visions, I pulled up the etymology on it, the origins of the word visions, and they'll say that it's comes from some type of imagination. So I'm take that for what it is, and to understand this tablet in the standard version of the Babylonian epic, Gilgamesh epic, you would have to read this whole entire chapter. And of course, I'm not going to read it because it's going to take away from, you know, a lot of time. I mean, it's a couple of pages long, less at least, yeah, about 8 or 9 pages long. But taking the time and reading this book for yourself, you can see the context of what it was trying to say. You can see the more in-depth information. Tablet 2, it says taming of Enkidu. That's what it's labeled as. It says the prostitute takes Enkidu to a shepherd's camp where he is instructed in the ways of men and becomes the shepherd's watchman. A passing stranger tells him how in Uruk, Gilgamesh exercises droit de Signor. I'm not sure if I said that correctly, but at wedding ceremonies, Enkidu. Let me stop right there. So basically, what that means is that, and this is actually, and like I said, I spent time in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was actually on the mission where um, uh, um, Uday and Kusei was killed. I had to pull guard at the roundabout that was close to their house. So I got to heard all the gunfire, and of course, we experienced our own stuff at our stop, at our spot guarding. But I was actually there, and anybody that knows about Uday and Kusei, they were tyrants too. Uh, at one time, of course. But basically, what Gilgamesh would do is anytime a man would marry a woman or get married to a woman, he would have the basically the he would just take, how can I say it without trying to get myself shut down on YouTube? He would basically have relationship with the wife before the husband could. Okay. And that's why a lot of people were saying he was a tyrant. He would take the woman after she got married, and before the husband could, have a physical relationship with her, Gilgamesh would. I'm not sure if he did it to every single woman, right? Because of course, not all of them was probably pleasing to his eyes, but he would definitely take those women, and he would have, maybe the night with them, and then he would send that woman away to her husband, and then the husband would be able to. So that's what that droit de Siganar means. But it's continuing from there. It says Enkidu, shocked by this practice, enters York and interrupts the proceedings. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight until Enkidu accepts Gilgamesh's supremacy, whereupon the pair became firm friends. In search of fame and glory, Gilgamesh proposed an expedition to the forest of Sidar, ignoring Enkidu's warning of the dangers. They kit themselves out with weapons. Gilgamesh announces his plans to the assembly of Uruk. The elders try to dissuade him. Now, when I read that, I read it as far as maybe they both got into a fight so bad that maybe Gilgamesh was almost, beaten to the point where he could have been, almost beaten to death, or Enkidu, they both beat each other crazy. Basically, that's how I read it. And because of the strength of Enkidu and what he was able to do to Gilgamesh, made Gilgamesh think like, yo, I'm not gonna live forever, and I want to live forever because Enkidu almost whooped my ass to the point where I could have died. Because there could have been moments in that, right? They were really fighting. Then they became good friends. That's you know it just makes you think what was going through Enkidu's mind when this was, after it happened. Like, yo, Gilgamesh, are you gonna stop what you're doing? You can't be doing this to people, right? And it doesn't really explain that too much. Maybe the Stephanie book does, and maybe I need to get into that book, which I will, because they brought that to my attention. That is probably among their favorites. But it says Tablet 7, the death of Enkidu. Now, mind you, Gilgamesh and Enkidu became best friends after that. They were literally best friends. So maybe Gilgamesh did take it upon himself to change some of his ways. But it says, in a dream, Enkidu sees the gods in assembly decree his doom. In anguish, delirium, he pictures before him the great door of cedar he made of Enlil's temple, and he curses it because it had failed to secure for him the god's favor. He then turns his thoughts to the trapper and the prostitute. The instruments of his introduction to civilization, whom he also blames for his plight, Shamash, persuades him to relent, and he returns to bless the prostitute. He has a second dream in which he is dragged down to the netherworld by the angel of death and granted a vision of hell. Remember the word vision. You look up the etymology of the word vision, and you get, out of the imagination. After describing the dream to Gilgamesh, he falls sick, languishing on his deathbed. He complains to Gilgamesh of the ignominy of his fate compared with death in battle. He dies. So that gives, Gilgamesh another reason to continue to look for a way to be alive for the rest of for as long as he wants to, basically live forever, right? His best friend dies, right? He got sick. He had a dream. He got sick. And and it could have been he had a dream because he was sick, right? He could have been dreaming because he was sick and he knew he was going to die, and boom, he then dies. And Gilgamesh was like, "Yo, I gotta go look for this plant to live forever," type thing. Okay, it says tablet 11, immortality denied, and this is where Utah Uta Nabashita. I'm not sure if I say that correctly. I've heard so many people say that differently, so I'm just going to go ahead and just say Noah, because in the Bible, that's what they're basically talking about. Or Zehozutra is another name for it. But because it's different time frames, I'm just going to stick with the word Noah just to keep it basic and simple. So just understand, when I say Noah, I'm talking about Uta Nabashitai or Zehozutra. So it says, Gilgamesh asks, and it says Uta Nabashita, how he gained eternal life, and here's how Uta Nabashitai survived the deluge, basically the flood, and was given immortality by the gods as a result. So Noah was basically given, he was supposed to have mortality, right? Immortality, I'm sorry. And it says, Uta Nabashitai suggests Gilgamesh go without sleep for a week. Gilgamesh fails the test and realizes in despair that he cannot beat sleep. He has no hope of conquering death. Okay, so he was told that he just needed to stay up for a week and he would live forever. Now, how can somebody stay up for a week, 7 days, 24 hours a day? That's up there, right? So Uta Nabashita commands his ferryman to have Gilgamesh bathe and dress himself in more kingly garments and to escort him back to York. Uta Nabashita's wife counsels him to give the departing hero the customary present for his journey. Uta Nabashita tells Gilgamesh how deep under the sea a plant like coral grows that has the property of rejuvenation. Gilgamesh dives to the seabed and retrieves it. He and Yershanabai leave for Uruk. Stopping at a welcoming pool, Gilgamesh bathes in its water, and a snake seizes on his inattention to steal the precious plant. Knowing that he will never rediscover the exact spot where he died, Gilgamesh realizes at last that all his abors have been in vain. So basically his hopes was, destroyed, and, he wasn't able to survive. Now, this is just interesting to me because, like I said, the gods come from the depths of the seas. Iki comes from the seas. Oannes comes from the seas. All these different, and the sea is just very important, right? And because Gilgamesh didn't know exactly how to get to that location, he wasn't able to go get a plant. So in reality, if this book is based on some factual events, that means in the sea somewhere, right? There's a plant that can rejuvenate our life. Now, most people know that the fountain of youth that people have been looking for, especially in Florida and so on and so forth. Just hearing the word that Gilgamesh, or hearing the words that Gilgamesh went to the seas or in the sea, the fountain of youth could actually be based on some type of facts, right? We don't know. Like I said, what it says, Moran says not to think of it as a myth, right? But myth means traditional oral story, but which definition are you using? Because you can definitely read a definition for myth to be fiction, right? Not true, right? So the next tablet is, the next tab is the Nipper School tablet. This is the Nipper School tablet. Now, you've heard me say this plenty of times in past episodes. Nipper is also known as Nibru, also known as Nibiru. Said different ways. I've heard people say different ways. But this was actually a Mesopotamian city, okay? This isn't a planet that orbits our sun every 3,600 years, where some guys named the Anunnaki lived on that mined gold on Earth to send back to their planet Nibiru. This Nipper is known as Nibiru/Nibru, and it is, like I said, a Mesopotamian city, not a planet, but a city. That's factual. Everybody that actually read the text for themselves knows this. All I'm waiting for somebody like Billy Carson to do is just show us what cuneiform tablet identifier says that there's a planet that orbits our sun every 3,600 years that the Sumerians talked about. Because, like I said in past episodes, Sumerians, according to Samuel Noah Kramer, which I've done some of his books already, and I'll be doing some more in the future, literally says that Nipper and Nibiru was one and the same. And if he can give out the Billy Carson or anybody that follows that Sitchin idea or theory, you can definitely produce the cuneiform tablet identifier that says that there's a planet orbit our sun. And like I said, Samuel Noah Kramer, he definitely talks in his books that the Sumerians only knew of 5 planets, the planets that you can see with your naked eye. So they didn't know about no 12 planets. I don't know where these people get this from. I could be wrong, but I need somebody to prove me wrong, because from Samuel Noah Kramer, he says they only knew of 5 planets. And he is basically he's not the first guy that was known as the Sumerologist, but they consider him, one of the bread and butters of the text and stuff like that. So it says the old Babylonian Nippur tablet was excavated on Tablet Hill at Nippur in the season 1951-2, so 1951 to 1952. More exactly, in the back room of a private house, which also served as a scribal school. It dates to the middle of the 18th century BC, specifically to the years immediately before the economic crisis that devastated southern Babylonia towards the end of the century and led to the closure of the school and the abandonment of the house. So when I was talking about schools and universities and all that stuff and people sending their kids and other individuals to these schools, it wasn't a school like you would send your kid to a school today. It was somebody who was educated on the writing system and the myths and so on and so forth, that you would send them to a house. So basically not a school, but a house of a tutor. So a person who had a house, right? And who was a tutor. And some of them would have a lot of students in there. And those, that teacher or whoever it was would get funds from the individual people who are trying to send their kids to the school or whoever they were trying to send. Chapter 5, it says the Sumerian poems of Gilgamesh. And this is basically, it says, in the earliest text from Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh's name appears in a slightly different form. Now, this is interesting because, like I said earlier, Gilgamesh wasn't always known as Gilgamesh. It is in the form as Bilgamesh. So instead of G, it was a B. So not Gilgamesh, but Bilgamesh or Bilgamesh, depending on how you want to write it. Because even here, I know you see on the book, it says it has an H on the end. And it wasn't always an H at the end. It was just an S sometimes. It's just different transliteration from the linguistic side of how they translated things. So like I said, the 5 Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh that were copied out with the varying degrees of popularity by would-be scribes in 18th century Babylonian schools are now much better known than formerly, and in particular, it is possible to give much fuller translations than ever before. So the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature gives one date for when those translations came from. But the same exact source, meaning the online version, the ancient, not the online version, the book version, the ancient literature of Sumer, which I have posted on my social media accounts. On the back of the book, it literally says 18th century BCE. So just thinking about that, 18th century BCE, that's what it says on the back of the book. So you know for a fact that it's not coming from the 3200 BC when the writing system began. Why? Because the writing system from the Sumerians began not because they was trying to record myths and tales and all this other stuff, but it was just used for basically trading. That's why in the beginning of this book right here, it says the Sumerian civilization, or the Sumerians and the Akkadians were started side by side, or I'm not going to say side by side, but they worked side by side with each other in so many ways. How can you have a writing system? Why would you need to have a writing system for trading if there's nobody else that has one? So that means another group of people had to have one, right? Their writing system started off as a pictographic script. It was for trading. That's literally what it was created for, was trading, to keep records how many cows went here and how much wheat went over there type thing, right? The significance of Gilgamesh feud with Inanna has been variously debated. Okay, he acknowledges this, debated. So just because somebody's in some X space saying, "Oh, Gilgamesh said this," guess what? It can be debated. Okay, because everybody has their own way. But let me continue why it can be debated. It says one view is that the conflict it relates symbolizes the political struggle by Sumer, represented by York, to be free of the imperial yoke of Akkad, represented by the goddess Inanna. Now that it seems more probable that the story develops from King Gilgamesh's repudiation of his city's goddesses in the specific rite of the sacred marriage. It appears less likely that Inanna can be other than the great goddess of York, and more likely that the composition bears a different ideological message, but perhaps it bears none at all. The purpose of the court poetry, such as the poems of Gilgamesh and much other Sumerian literature, was probably simply to amuse and entertain the king and his guests, not to promote political ideology. So there goes the word probably again, right? And that's why they said debated. And you got to remember, they didn't have TV and stuff like that. I'll say this. I'm pretty sure anybody that's listening right now has watched a movie that's based on a true story, right? Well, how do you know what's true and false in that story? Well, you got to go in there and research about that story, and you know for a fact that you don't know what somebody exactly said to somebody else if they was in a private room in their house or something like that, right? Nobody knows unless the person that was in that house with that other person told them. But even then, they're probably leaving some stuff out, right? It's just, you have to be very careful. And that's why I said earlier from beginning that you have to just basically take it with a grain of salt. But what I can tell you for a fact that I'm not taking with a grain of salt is that there is no cuneiform tablet identifier that says that Anunnaki came from planet Nibiru that orbits our sun every 3,600 years, and the Anunnaki came here to mine gold for their home planet Nibiru. Because guess what? Nibiru is an ancient Mesopotamian city. The next tab, it says, Gilgamesh took up his weapons and rid the tree of his vile inhabitants. It failed the tree and gave Inanna the timber for the furniture she needed. So basically, she just wanted to build some type of furniture, right? And there was this individual, which if you go to Samuel Noah Kramer's book, I can't remember which one exactly. I did a show on it already. You can say, oh no, eat the fruit. I got way more than just one viewer. I'm actually on multiple different what you call it, medias. I'm on my Facebook, YouTube, and X account. So no, not just one viewer, bro. Maybe just on YouTube, but not on there. I promote on a lot of different social media. This is good. I love it when people like this come in here and say stuff, because if you go to my Twitter account, it's going to be in the hundreds, brother. So good way. I love that. I love that. But it's good that he came to show up. Matter of fact, this is a dude, and I'm glad he came in here and said something. I'm not sure if he's still watching or not, right? But when I first started my website about 5 years ago, rebirthoftheword.com, this is how I know haters love to hate, and I love them when they come to my show and stuff like that. I started my website 5 years ago, right? I had like maybe 2 or 3 articles, and he came on my he DM'd me and said, hey man, if you ever want to write for my website to promote your website, I would love to have you. So of course, what I did was I wrote a lot of articles on it. Matter of fact, there was me and this other guy, I can't remember his name. We actually the highest articles read on his website because he gave us permission and stuff like that. Yeah, I know Lil Vi. it actually says more than that on my side. It's not all the way updated. But I love it. Yeah, definitely will be over 100 on replay. That always happens, you know what I'm saying? There's always on there because I don't actually have a set time when I do these. But it's so funny he says that because I actually wrote articles for him on his website. He got mad at me one day and, kicked me off. Just like a lot of people do, I correct them in what they say, and it doesn't go with their narrative because I actually go to the books. Like I said, I'm glad he's watching, you know what I'm saying? Because, these are the type of tabs that I have on her. So I'm glad he's in here watching in here because, haters going to hate. They watch you from a distance, you know what I'm saying? They always do, you know what I'm saying? I'm a bestseller at that. Not only that, I also have my stuff streaming to Good Pods. And just to let you know, homie, Eat the Fruit, he used to have a website, but it's no more, right? Because he couldn't keep that shit running by himself, right? Mine's 5 years strong right now with almost 1 million views. So we're gonna keep it like that. It's I'm also on Good Pods, and I've shared, the pictures. I actually made top 100 on Good Pods in like 4 different categories. Top 100 on Good Pods. So my podcast is jumping, my Spotify is jumping, my YouTube. There's not too many people spend. I don't promote my YouTube as much. That's why I don't have that many followers. But I definitely, if you go through my videos, you'll see that I get a couple of hundred to thousands of views on my videos on it by itself. So, and I'm grateful for that. It's never about one views. Matter of fact, I'm glad that he said one viewer, because to be honest with you, when I started my website 5 years ago, I never cared about viewers. That's why you don't see me pleasing anybody and trying to be friendly with people when they say stupid stuff. You know what I'm saying? I don't care about that. I just go and share exactly what I've read. I go exactly over the material that I have. I've had so many great guests on my website, on my YouTube and my Spotify and all this other stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I'm grateful, even if it's just one viewer, right? Because guess what? Socrates was killed for what he was sharing, right? And what he was saying. So if you, and Jesus, the most hated man on this planet, right? Because a lot of people hate him, was crucified for sharing his knowledge, right? So if you want to say one viewer, brother, go ahead, but it's definitely going to be over 100 before the day's over with. And I'm always grateful for that. You know what I'm saying? I know people who have 20, 30,000 followers on YouTube alone and probably only get like 400 views. And a lot of them buy bots. I don't buy bots. I know who buy bots. Matter of fact, Code Rejects, Nick, he buys his bots for his YouTube channel. I know this personally. I mean, this dude told me so many stuff that I don't understand why people tell me their stuff, because once they do me dirty, I'm just going to let the air out. You know what I'm saying? There's no reason. There's no reason for me to hold it in. If you come at me, I come at you harder. But it's just amazing that people like that will come in here and say stuff like that and don't even realize who they are talking to. I never went against the grain. Matter of fact, the only reason why he disliked me is because I came at him and told him that he was wrong about something. And that was the end of it, basically, right? You can look, we both started our websites at the same time, because he had started his website the same time I started mine, maybe a few months before or whatnot. But since January of this year, I published my book, Journey Through the Origins of History, and it's bestseller on it stays in the top 100, give or take, on new books published and stuff like that. But I've been top 100 in so many, top number 1 in so many different categories just in my book alone, right? So, and this beat out people who have the PhDs in these fields and stuff like that. So I'm so grateful for everybody that takes the time to do this, because a lot of you guys don't. Matter of fact, none of you guys take what I say personal. You know what I'm saying? I share what I've learned. That's it. I go over the tabs that I read. That's why I have over 60, 70 books that I've already went over on my YouTube channel alone by itself. And I'm going to continue to do this. It will never just be one viewer, because a lot of people appreciate what I do. I get a lot of DMs. I've been been a guest on a lot of podcasts. I mean, if he would have never got in his feelings, he could have, his website would have probably been still jumping. Matter of fact, you go to eatthefruit.com right now and you're going to see that shit ain't jumping. I don't know what he did to that website. You know what I'm saying? There's no more articles on there. Matter of fact, a lot of the articles that were on there were from other people. It wasn't really none of his own stuff. Matter of fact, he kicked one guy out, I remember, because and this dude had like thousands and thousands of viewers on his stuff, because he was promoting that website, and he got mad at him and basically kicked him out. And that's what people do. People create content. His content was saying, wow, look at you go, one viewer. You're watching from Facebook, bro. I just started promoting this on Facebook. Like literally just started promoting this on my 3-4 episodes ago. I've been doing this on YouTube for almost for a year and a half now. So, and everybody most of my followers is on Twitter, almost at 20,000 followers just by myself on Twitter. I went from 4,000 to 20,000 in a matter of months. just the last few 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 or 6. I can't remember exact date, but I went from 4,000 to almost 20,000 in just a few months because people actually like this material. Like people watch it from X all the time. Like it's crazy. So I appreciate that. His name is Jacob, by the way. His name is Jacob. You know what I'm saying? So it's just funny to me that he came in here and said that because he made himself look very stupid. And that's one ways that I love when haters come in here and talk that shit. You know, he came in here and tried to say one viewer, yo, I just started promoting this on Facebook. And I'm rarely on Facebook at that. Matter of fact, in the first place. And I'm not even promoting this from the most account. I have like just by myself almost one of my groups like 40,000. I have over 100,000 compare with different types of groups so that I actually am an admin and own on Facebook. But I'm promoting this on my personal Facebook account, and the reason why is just or page because I felt like, hey, I could do up to 3. Why not, right? And then it's going to go on Spotify and Good Pods and all those other places. So, hey, you might see me back on the list again for top 100 on Good Pods. But hey, I appreciate that. Eat the fruit. I'm glad you're here, brother. I really do. Maybe you'll learn something because you could have at least said something that I said was wrong, but you decided to go with that one route. Goofy, right? I love when goofy people come on it. Matter of fact, this is the last 2 tabs that I have, or last few tabs that I have, and it's the glossary of proper names. So basically, and I'm glad he's watching me because hey, when people watching you that hate on you, you're doing something good, right? But it's basically the glossary of proper names, right? And I'm sure he's still probably in here because I can see the numbers when people are coming in here and stuff like that. Matter of fact, it tells you how many people. If I scroll over the eye, it will tell you how many people are watching on each one. And he just left, so but that's good. So this is where I found that was interesting. So in the glossary of the proper names on the back of this book, and I always talk about this. I've talked about this plenty of times. I've brought this up so many different times that the Anuna or the Anunnaki, because it says Anuna here, but then it says C Anunnaki right here because that's what most people know them as. It says a traditional name for one of the 2 divisions of the pantheon in the latter periods assigned to the gods of the netherworld. Igigi, Igigi, right? So these was just a traditional name for the gods. I've talked about this before. The electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature has it in there, and also the ancient literature of Sumer, the book version, has it in there. Now, this is what it says about the Igigi, and this is why I always say the Igigi or the Igigi are known as the greater gods or the great gods. They're supposed to be greater than the Anunnaki, but just keep it simple and sweet. I always wonder why these great gods would ask the Anunnaki to create something to relieve the toil of the Igigi or Igigi, because they were the ones that was doing the toiling. But like I said, explained in my last episode, leaders lead from the front, right? But Igigi, a traditional name for one of the 2 divisions of the pantheon, in the latter periods assigned to the great gods of heaven. Okay, so the Igigi were known as the great gods. Then, of course, it says right here, C Anunnaki. So who was really in charge? Nobody really knows. The idea of who these great gods are, nobody really can say who they are, whether they the Igigi or whether they the Anunnaki. But I can tell you, when you pick up the electronic text corpus of Sumer, or the ancient literature of Sumer, the book, and go to the back of it, you will see that the Igigi were known as the great gods, right? And the Anunnaki were just known as the gods. So that was that book right there, The Epic of Gilgamesh by George Smith. Or Andrew George. See, I did it again. See, I told you I always mix it up. I always do that. I always mix them 2 up. It's because of the damn George part that always messes me up. So this is the, and I'll be going over the George Smith books over in the future also. But the Epic of Gilgamesh from Andrew George. I'm about to look up and see what book I have coming up next. I believe it's Billy Carson's book. So what I'm going to do, if it is is that because Billy Carson likes to take his information from other people and make it seem like he was the one person that translated and he's the know-it-all of all this stuff. He doesn't give credit to the actual individuals. Uh, let me see. Let me see. Yeah, so the next books I'm going to be doing is the Compendium of the Emerald Tablets, A Beginner's Guide by Billy Carson. And I'm going to go ahead and add in there the Amulet Tablets of Thoth and the Atlantean translation interpretation by Maurice Durrell. And then I'm also going to add his other book. Let me scroll down and see where's it at, because I got a lot of books and I have to scroll down. They're all my books. All the books that I've read 3 times is on my website so far. Is the next book, then I'm going to add the third book for Billy Carson is The Mysteries of the Forbidden Emerald Tablets of Thoth. And I'm going to show you how Billy Carson basically took information from Maurice Durrell and tried to say, this is what he translated and read himself. I can tell you right now, there's no emerald tablet in it. I go over it. Sir Isaac Newton. You want to know anything about the emerald tablets? Go look that up and go look at where that translation is at. And some people will see the truth in the matter. So I'm going to use Billy Carson's books are next. I'm going to go through his books and show you how he took word for word Maurice Durrell's what he wrote in his 70-page book and applied it in his first book. And try to say that, this is what he knows. Now, he does give credit and it says Maurice Durrell is the one that translated them, but he tries to expand and say, this is what it really means. Unless you spoke to Maurice Durrell yourself, you don't know exactly what it means. So I appreciate everybody coming in. Thank you. We got well over, it says right here, 43 viewers. Like I say, I don't care about the 43 video viewers. As far as trying to get hundreds and thousands of people, I appreciate the people that watch me anyway from just giving me the time of the day to listen. It's never, and look, numbers is still jumping up, which is crazy. But for the 2 people that just started watching on X, just go back and watch this on YouTube, or please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm trying to get those numbers up, of course, because of the simple fact that I do want to monetize my YouTube now. I never really cared about monetization, but I do want to get some new equipment, and I can get the equipment faster if I monetize my YouTube. So just a quick subscribing and watching a video and having it on replay or whatever gives me the hours to do that. I appreciate everybody in here. Like I said, the next books I'm going to be doing is 3 books. One by Maurice Durrell, which is actually the guy that got the translation from Thoth himself, who wrote the translations of Thoth. And then the 2 books from Billy Carson. I appreciate everybody. If you have time today, go visit Lil Vibe on Spotify, play a song on there. 2 of my favorite songs on there is Ambitions and Levels, because there's levels to this shit. And you can obviously see through my time of doing videos, I've always leveled up of what I've done. And go check out Lil Vibe. I appreciate everybody. Peace out. Y'all take it easy. Knowledge is power.